Out of Phase by Joe Haldeman. Originally published in the September 1969 issue of Galaxy magazine, which republished it in Volume 1 of their Best of Galaxy magazine in 1972. It appeared in a Dutch anthology in 1980, an Italian magazine in 2009, and a German anthology in 1982. It was included in a collection of the author's stories entitled A Separate War and Other Stories in 2006. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Out of Phase. Trapped. From the waterfront bar to a crap game to a simple-minded ambush in a dead-end alley. He didn't blame them for being angry. His pockets were stuffed with their money, greasy and crumpled 5s and 10s, 2,020 of their hard-earned dollars, if his memory served him right, and of course it did. They had supplied 3 sets of dice, 2 loaded, 1 shaved. All 3 were childishly easy to manipulate. He let them win every throw at first, then less and less often. Finally, he tested their credulity and rapidly emptied their pockets with 10 sevens in a row. That much had been easy, but now he was in a difficult position. Under the transparent pretext of finding a bigger game, the leader of the gang had steered him into this blind alley where 5 others were hiding in ambush. And now the 6 were joined in a line, advancing on him, pushing him toward the tall hurricane fence that blocked the end of the alley. He started pacing them, walking backward. Not that they could do any physical harm to him, but he needed time, only 30 seconds, give or take a little, before he would back into the fence and be caught. 30 seconds objective. He froze and did a little trick with his brain. All the energy his strange body produced, except for that fraction needed to maintain human form, was channeled into heightening his sensory perceptions, accelerating his mental processes. He had to find a way out of this dilemma without exposing his true nature. The murderous sextet seemed to slow down as the ratio of subjective to objective time flux increased arithmetically, geometrically, exponentially. A drop of sweat rolled down the leader's brow, fell 2 feet in a fraction of a second, a foot in the next second, an inch in the next, a millimeter, a micron. Now. A pity he couldn't just kill them all slowly and painfully. Terrible to have artistic responsibility stifled by practical considerations. Such a beautiful composition. A spectrum of attitudes ranging from the little one's ill-concealed fear of pain, of inflicting pain, to the leader's leering, sadistic anticipation of pleasure in the kill. The dilettante. A smallish work, only 6 to play on. Still, he ought to practice on some little pieces before the great epic, but it might arouse suspicion. And Larval said, "That snail, insensitive brute. Next time out, I'll get me a supervisor who is able to understand. But next time out, I'll be too old. Even now, I can feel it. Damn that snail." The ship hovered above a South American plantation. People looked at it and saw only the sky. Radar would never detect it. Only a voodoo priest in a mushroom trance felt its presence. He tried to verbalize and died of a cerebral occlusion. Too quick. Artless. Broxson was kind of ashamed of it. "Bluntly, I wish we didn't have to use you, Braxton." Larval was talking. His crude race communicated vocally, and the unmodulated, in and out of phase thought waves washed a gravelly ebb and flow of pain through Broxton's organ of communication. He stored the pain, low intensity that it was, for contemplation at a more satisfactory time. Larval repeated, "If only We had brought someone else of your sort, besides your father, of course. Shape changers aren't such a rarity. He plucked out a cilium in frustration, but of course felt no pain. Broxson was too close, sucked it in. A Gedelian poet, a poet of pain, of all the useless baggage to drag around on a survey expedition. Larval sighed and ground his shell against the wall. But we have no choice. Only two bipeds aboard the ship, and neither of them is even remotely mammalian, and the natives of this planet are acutely xenophobic. Hell, they're omniphobic. Even harder to take than you, worthy poet. But this is the biggest find of the whole trip. The crucial period of transition. They may be on the brink of civilization, still animals, but rapidly advancing. Think of it. In 10 or 20 generations they may be human and seek us as most do. The shapeless blob that was Broxson was turning a bored shade of green. We've met thousands of civilized races, more thousands of savage ones, but this is the first we've ever found in transition, correct? Ethnology, alien psychology, everything. Larval shuddered. Even your people's excuse for art will benefit immeasurably. Broxson had his doubts, but he made no comment. He hadn't bothered to form a speech organ for the interview. He knew Larval would do all the talking anyway. But Broxson had been studying under stasis for several hours. Knowing exactly what needed to be done, he let most of his body disintegrate into its component parts and started to rebuild. First, the skeleton, bone by thousandth bone, the internal organs, in logical order, glistening, throbbing, functioning, wet red muscle, fat, connective tissue, derma, epidermis, smooth and olive, fingernails, hair, small mole on the left cheek, vocal cords, virgin, throb contralto. Mammalian enough? Speak galactic. I said, mammalian enough? I mean, would you like them bigger? She demonstrated. Or smaller? How would I know? Snapped Larval, trying to hide his disgust. Pick some sort of statistical mean. Broxson picked a statistical mean between the October and the November Playmate of the Month. With what he thought was detached objectivity, Larval said, Ugly bunch of creatures, aren't they? About 100 million years ago, Larval's prehistoric ancestors had known one natural enemy, a race of biped mammals. With a silvery laugh, Broxson left to prepare for planetfall. He got a kick, for the moment, out of being a she. Broxson had studied Earth and its people for some 10,000 hours, subjective time. She knew about clothes, she knew about sex, she knew about rape. So she appeared on Earth, on a dirt road somewhere in South America, without a stitch and without a blush, and her scholastic observations were confirmed in the field, so to speak, in less than 5 minutes. She learned quite a bit the first time, less the second. The third time, well, she was merely bored. She made him into a beautiful poem. She made him into a mouse-sized, shriveled brown husk lying dead by the side of the road, his tiny features contorted with incredible agony. She synthesized clothes, gray and dirty, and changed herself into an old, crippled hag. It was 20 minutes before she met another man who... Another dry husk. Braxton was getting an interesting, if low, opinion of men, Bolivian farmers in particular, so she changed herself into one. The shoe on the other foot, she found, made things different, but not necessarily better. Well, she was gathering material. She waited for a car to come by, reverted to the original voluptuous pattern, disposed of the driver when he stopped to investigate, took his form and his car, and started on a world tour. Braxton tried to do everything and be everyone. He was, in turn, a doctor, lawyer, fencing coach, prostitute, auto racer, mountain climber, golf pro. He ran a pornography shop in Dallas, a hot dog stand at Coney Island, a death sleep house in Peking, a Vietnamese coffee house, the museum at Dachau. He peddled Bibles and amulets, fuller brushes and heroin. He was a society deb, a bohemian poet, a member of parliament, a cul de jatte in Monaco. For operating expenses, when he needed small sums, he wove baskets, sold his body, dived for pennies, cast horoscopes, threw dice. The sweat drop had moved 1/100th of an inch. Must stop wasting time, but it's so hard to concentrate when it feels as if you had all the time in the universe. Braxton knew that he could remain in this state only a few more minutes, subjective, before he was stuck in it, permanently. On the ship, he could spend as much time as he wanted in mental acceleration, but here there was no apparatus to shock him out of it before trance set in. The trance would go on for more than 1,000 years. Such was his race's span of life. But to the 6 hoods, he would age and die in a few seconds, reverting to his original form for an invisible nanosecond before dissolving into a small gray mound of dust. He was seeing in the far infrared now, and definition was very poor. He switched to field recognition. The dull animals confronting him had dim red psionic envelopes, almost completely washed out by his own, a crackling stroboscopic violet. Electromagnetic. The ion fog around the leader's watch glowed pale blue. Leakage from the telephone and power lines made kaleidoscopic patterns overhead. His back felt warm. Warm? He switched to visual again and searched the people's eyes for reflections. There, the little scared one. His eyes mirrored the fence, the hurricane fence, gate spaced with ceramic insulators. He started to slow down his mind, speed up the world. The drop inched, fell to the ground with slow purpose, struck and flowered into tiny droplets. Sound welled up around him. "Won't have to use the gun." Braxton stumbled back toward the electrified fence, manufacturing adrenaline to substitute for his spent strength. His stomach knotted and flamed with impossible hunger. He received the pain and cherished it. The leader advanced for the kill, bold and cocky, switchblade in his right hand, his left swinging a bicycle chain like a stubby lariat. Braxton secreted a flesh-colored rubbery coating over his body and, on top of that, a thin layer of saline mucus. "Left-handed retiarus," he mumbled under his breath. The leader brought the chain around in a swift, flat arc, face high. Braxton reached back and made contact with the fence. The chain cracked Braxton high on the right cheekbone and whipped around the back of his head, the end of it putting out his left eye. There was a low 60-cycle hum. His good eye saw the hood give one spastic jerk and crumple to the ground. He looped the chain around the little one's neck and pulled him into the fence. 4 to go. They had backed away, somewhat bewildered. One took a step toward Braxton, faltered, then turned and ran. The others bolted and followed him. Basking in the pain of his shattered face, Braxton leisurely reached out with his mind and sorted their garbled thoughts. Unfortunately, all four had grasped the significance of his trick with the fence, and none should be allowed to spread the tale, however unbelievable. To buy time, he stopped the blood flow to their brains temporarily. Each one collapsed before he reached the end of the alley. He carried them back and carefully arranged them around the fence. Carefully, for it was delicate work, Braxton erased their memories of the past few hours. He substituted the memory of an elaborate and vicious practical joke, which ended with all of them being knocked unconscious by the charge from the fence. All fixed up. But time enough for a special little treat for the leader, Cleve, who had caused him to go to all this trouble. He studied the man's still figure. Dirty blonde hair, low forehead, drooping mustache not quite hiding an unsightly mole at the corner of his mouth, black leather shirt tight over flaccid muscles, beer belly, faded blue jeans tucked into black boots. With little effort, Braxton redid his own exterior in the shape of Cleve, but he took the details not from reality but from the twisted self-image in Cleve's dim brain. Thus the biceps were a little larger, the face a little meaner than a lying mirror would reflect, flat belly and hair blonde almost to the point of whiteness. Instead of the ugly mole, there was an incredibly virile scar that lanced down to his chin, catching the corner of his mouth down into an arrogant sneer. Grade B movie syndrome. He manipulated a couple of glands, and the real Cleve woke up instantly. He caught sight of Braxton. His eyes narrowed, and he rose slowly to his feet. He kept his distance and stared. Sure of Cleve's attention, Braxton started his performance. The strong, manly face blurred for an instant and came back into focus. The scar was a puffy, infected seam that defiled a face no longer vigorous or handsome. It pulled down the lower lip to expose a yellow canine. The face was lined with a delicate tracery of worry and pain, the grooves growing deeper and more complex in front of Cleve's horrified eyes. The hair, sprinkled with gray, grew white and was gone except for a dirty stubble on the twisted, knobby chin. Face and body wasted away. Wrinkled parchment stretched tight over a leering death mask. Bloodshot eyes clotted with rheum. Cataracts clouded and blinded them. The lids closed and collapsed inward, and the body, real only in the minds of two disparate creatures, was mercifully dead. The skin turned gray, then olive, and released its life grip on the ancient body. The body puffed up again in macabre burlesque of its younger brawn. It lived again for a short time as maggots fed on its putrescence. Then a dry, withered husk, still standing upright. The last vestiges of skin and flesh sloughed off to reveal a brown-stained skeleton filled with nameless cobwebs. It collapsed with a splintering clatter. On top of the pile of gray dust and bones, the yellow skull glared balefully at Cleve for a long moment, and then, piece by piece, the whole grisly collection started to reassemble itself. Cleve had been trying to scream for nearly a minute. Finally, he let out a little squeak and fainted. Braxton made sure he would be out for a while, then erased from Cleve's memory the specific details of the experience. He left only a gnawing, undirected feeling of horror. He scanned the silent forms around him and found that they were all still unconscious. One, the little one, was dead. Probing further, Braxton dissolved a blood clot, patched an infarction, and shocked the still heart back into action. Pity to spoil good art. He liked the combination of cause and effect and dumb luck causing the only harmless one to die. Survival of the fittest, eugenics will out, and all that. With a mental shrug, Braxton walked off to find a cab. "Oh, enter by all means." Larval slipped into the survey chief's cabin with trepidation. He was in for a bad time. The chief, who looked like a cross between a carrot and a praying mantis, got right to the point. Larval, your reports stopped coming in several cycles ago. From this I infer that A. Your scout is dead. Not likely. B. He got disgusted with your asinine questions and lectures. Rather more likely. Or C. He went on one of his blasted binges and is busily turning the autochthones into quatrains and limericks. I find this last alternative the most probable, if the least palatable. He is a Gadrelian, an adolescent at that. Do you know what that means? Yes, sir, that means he's in the aesthetic stage of his... It means he should have been locked up before we got within a parsec of this primitive world. You should not have sent him down on the surface of this world alone, least of all without consulting your captain. You may have been in charge of ethnological research, but certain decisions are not implemented without my okay. But, sir, after his initial experiments, he stopped killing them. I made him stop. He might have drawn attention to himself. Your devotion to objectivity is most commendable. Thank you, sir. It shows that you know and appreciate the first rule of contact. He pressed a stud and one wall became transparent. He gestured at the busy scene beneath them. Are they aware of our presence? Of course not, sir. That is the first rule. Tell me, Larval, what sort of radiation would you suppose their eyes are sensitive to? The captain's addiction to obliqueness was most exasperating. Well, sir, since their planet goes around a yellow star, their organs of vision are most sensitive to a narrow band of radiation centered around the yellow wavelengths. The captain scraped his thorax with a claw. Larval interpreted this as applause. His race had forgotten sarcasm eons before the captains had invented fire. You are a good study, Larval. Thank you, sir. So we make the ship transparent to these wavelengths at great expenditure of power. Yes, sir. So the natives' development won't be influenced by premature knowledge of, and with similar expenditure of power, we extend this transparency down to the longer wavelengths. Why do we do this, Larval? The little ethnologist was perplexed. Even the lowliest cabin boy could answer these questions. Why, of course, sir, it's to make the ship invisible to radar detection. Only it's not really invisible. It's just that the local implicit coefficient of absorption becomes asymptotic with Larval. The captain sighed. I learned one of those creatures' words the other day. I suppose by now you've run into it also. Catechism. Yes, sir. Larval squirmed. Now, as far as I can tell, though I'm not a man of learning myself, this is a form of stylized debate. One person asks a series of questions. The answers are so simple that they brook no disagreement or misinterpretation. These answers, forced, as it were, upon the hapless interrogatee, lead to an inevitable conclusion which gains a spurious validity through sheer tautological mass. Is that fairly accurate? Larval paused for a second to retrieve the sentence's verbs as the captain had mischievously, if appropriately, switched from English to Middle High German. Yes, sir. Very accurate. Well, then, the captain gave a gleaming metallic smile. To borrow another of their delightfully savage concepts, the coup de grace, how did we know long before we came within range? Radio broadcasts, sir, and television, which means, sir, I'm aware of... You're aware of the fact that our arty friend could gain control of this planet-wide network and, in a matter of seconds, destroy almost every intelligent being on the planet, or perhaps worse, reduce them to gibbering animals, or worse still, increase their understanding of themselves beyond the threshold. Yes, sir. Larval could fill in the blanks. Then get out of here and let more capable minds deal with the situation. Yes, sir. The ethnologist started to scuttle toward the door. And, Larval, remember that your captain, like most of the members of this expedition, normally communicates mind to mind and receives your surface thoughts even when they are not verbalized. Yes, sir, he said meekly. Your captain may be a pompous martinet, yes, but really, Larval, a vegetable that walks like a man. Racism is, I think, singularly inappropriate in an ethnologist. Make an appointment with the psychiatric staff. Yes, sir. And on your way down, check at the galley and see if Troxel has a couple of years' work for you to do. The captain watched the disconsolate creature scurry out. He settled down at his desk. He passed a claw over a photosensitive plate. Computer, he thought. Here, Captain. Where the hell is that Gadrelian poet? The machine thought, a low hum. I can't find him. He must be generating a strong block. You know a Gadrelian can synthesize dummy thought waves exactly out of phase with his natural pattern, and by combining the two patterns, how do you know he isn't just on the other side of the planet? The captain sighed. A computer will talk on one subject forever if you let it. Using the planet's satellites as passive reflectors, I can cover 90% or more of the planet's surface, and by integrating the fringe effects from I believe you, then tell me where is his old goat of a father? Mediating in the meat locker in the form of a large stalactite. As he has been, I might add, ever since you... All right. Have stores send me up a winter outfit. I'll have to go and try to blackmail him into telling me where his blasted progeny is. Give him 1,000 witless ethnologists, thought the captain to himself. Give him 1,000 garrulous computers, but spare him the company of even one Gadrelian. Even on Gadrel, they confined the adolescents to one island to work out their poetry on worms and insects and each other. A survey expedition needed a Gadrelian, of course, a mature one to solve problems beyond the scope of the computer. But damn that Brojas! He must have known he was gravid when he volunteered for the trip. How did one deal with these creatures who seem to live only to torment other people with their weird, inscrutable sense of humor? Brojas knew he would undergo fission, knew his offspring would reach adolescence in mid-voyage, and probably contrived to send the ship to a planet where... The captain's reverie was broken by the robot from stores. "The clothing you requested, sir."
"Just put it on the hook there."
The robot did so and glided out of the room.
"He should have had it delivered to the locker,"
thought the captain. Clothing was tantamount to obscenity to many of the crew members, and one had to maintain dignity. "Yes, one must, mustn't one?" thought the computer.
"Will you go do something useful?"
The captain threw up a block in time to miss the reply. He jerked the clothes off the hook and strode out of the cabin, letting out occasional thoughts about the ancestry, mating habits, etc., of the machine that was the ship's true captain. "Fasten your seatbelts, please." The slender stewardess swayed down the aisle, past a young man with a handsome, placid face and a Brooks Brothers suit. "Landing at Kennedy International in 3 minutes. Braxton did as told, shifting the heavy attaché case from his lap to the floor. 200 pounds of gold bullion would buy a lot of prime time. They landed uneventfully. Braxton took a helicopter to the Pan American building, went down to the 131st floor and into an office. Gold leaf on the frosted glass entrance proudly proclaimed, "Somebody, somebody, and somebody, advertising counselors." He came out 200 pounds lighter, having traded the gold for 1 minute of time. At 9 Saturday night, an hour away, on each of the major television and radio networks. A triumph of money over red tape. His commercial would be strictly live, with no chance of FCC interference, and his brand of soap would certainly make the world a cleaner place to live in. Alone. The captain donned his thermal outerwear and entered the massive locker. Sure enough, there was a large blue stalactite suspended from the ceiling. He addressed it.
"Brojas," he thought obsequiously, "would you serve your captain?"
The huge icicle fell and splintered into several thousand pieces. They reassembled into a creature who looked rather like the captain.
"What would you do to me if I said no?"
"That's ridiculous," said the captain, somewhat emboldened by facing a familiar shape. "No one can do anything to harm you."
"All right, that's settled. Will you please go and let me get back to my conversation?"
Curious in spite of himself, the captain asked,
"Whom are you conversing with? You don't generally think with the other crew members."
"My father has found a particularly humorous ninth-order differential equation. He is explaining it to me, and I would like to devote all of my energy to understanding."
The captain shivered, not just from cold. Brojas's father had been dead for 30 years, but half of him would live as long as Brojas lived, a quarter would live as long as Braxton, and so on down the line. It was unsettling to mere mortal beings that a Gadrellian maintained an autonomous existence within his descendants for hundreds of thousands of years after physical death. Whether a Gadrellian would ever die completely was problematical. They claimed that none yet had.
"This won't take much of your time. I want you to locate Braxton and give him a message."
"Why can't you find him yourself?"
"It's a rather large planet, Brojas, and he's thrown up a strong communication block."
"We're on a planet? Which one?"
The captain thought a long string of figures.
"They call it Earth."
"I'm afraid I'm unfamiliar with it. Please open your mind and let me extract the relevant details."
The captain did so, with chagrin. Brojas could easily have asked the computer, but his people were born voyeurs and never would pass up the chance to probe another's mind.
"Interesting. Savage. I can see why he was drawn to it. Incidentally, your treatment of Larval was shameful. In his place, you would have lost control of my son just as quickly. And your knowledge, Captain, of the people on this planet is encyclopedic but imperfect. You misunderstand both catechism and tautology. You used the expression coup de grace where coup de théâtre would have been more fitting. And your Middle German would send a Middle German into convulsions. Furthermore, you are an ambulatory vegetable. To your credit, however, you were correct in assessing my son's plans. He is now in the possession of a minute of time, as they say, on the planet's communications network. Funny idea, that. Beings possessing time rather than the other way around.
Brohas!
Captain?
Aren't you going to do anything?
Interfere with my child's development?
He's going to kill 4 billion entities.
Yes, he probably is. Mammals, though. You have to admit they'd probably never make anything of themselves anyhow.
Brohas, you must stop him.
I'm pulling your spindly leg, Captain. I'll talk to him. Just once I would like to have a captain who could take a joke. You know, you vegetable people are unique in the civilized universe in your—
How much time do you have?
2,338 years, 4 days, and—
No, how much time before Braxton gets on the air?
If Braxton got on the air, he would fall to the ground, even as you and I.
The captain made a strangling noise.
Oh, don't bust a root. I have several seconds yet.
Brohas reverted to his native formlessness and sent a tendril of thought through his son's massive block.
Braxton, this is your father. Will you slow down just a bit?
Braxton concentrated, and the bustling studio slowed down and froze into a tableau of suspended action. Yes, Father. Is there something I can help you with?
Well, first tell me what you're doing in a television studio.
Well, at the minute of maximum saturation, I'm going to broadcast the vegan death sign. That's all.
That's all? You'll kill everybody.
Well, not everybody, just those who are watching television. Oh, yes, I've worked out a phonetic equivalent for simultaneous radio transmission. Get a few more that way, if it works.
Oh, I'm sure you can do it, son. But, Braxton, that's what I wanted to think to you about.
You're going to try to think me out of it.
Well, if you want to put it that way.
I bet that joke of a captain put you up to it.
You know that vegetable that walks like a man?
Hey, that's a good one, Father. When did you—
Neither he nor anyone else on this tin can could make me do anything that I—
Brohas sighed.
Look, Braxton, you're poaching on a game preserve. Worse, shooting fish in a barrel. With a fission bomb yet. How can you get any satisfaction out of that?
Father, I know that quantity is no substitute for quality, but there are so many here. Brohas snorted.
And you want to be poet laureate, right?
There's something wrong in that. This will be the biggest epic since Jukadir exterminated the—
Braxton, my son, you're temporizing. You know what's wrong, don't you? Surely you can feel it.
Braxton fell silent as he tried to think of a convincing counter-argument. He knew what was coming.
The fact is that you are maturing rapidly. It's time to put away your blocks. Sure, you can go through with this trivial exercise, but you won't be poet laureate. You'll be dunce of the millennium, prize buffoon. You're too old for this nonsense. I know it. You know it, and the whole race would know it eventually. You wouldn't be able to show your mind anywhere in the civilized universe.
He knew that his father was thinking the truth. He had known for several days that he was ready for the next stage of development, but his judgment was blinded by the enormity of the canvas he had before him.
Correct. The next stage awaits you, and I can assure you that it will be even more satisfying than the aesthetic. You have a nice planet here, and you might as well use it as the base of your operations. The captain is easily cowed. After I assure him that you no longer wish to, shall we say, immortalize these people in verse, he'll be only too glad to move on without you. We'll be back to pick you up in a century or so. Goodbye, son.
Goodbye, Father. The filament of the green light on the camera facing him was just starting to glow. He had something less than 1/100th of a second. Extending his mental powers to the limit, he traced down every network and advertising executive who knew of the deal he had made. From the minds of hundreds of people, he erased 1,000,000 memories, substituting harmless ones. 200 pounds of gold disappeared back into thin air. Books balanced. Everyone in the studio had the same memory. 5 minutes ago, a police-escorted black limousine screeched to a halt out front, and this man, familiar face, lined and pale with shock, stormed in with a covey of Secret Service men and commandeered the studio. Broxson filled out his face and body with paunch. The man who owned this face died painlessly as soon as Broxson had assimilated the contents of his brain. The body disappeared. His family and associates remembered that he was in New York for the week. A finger of thought pushed into another man's heart and stopped it. Convincing. He was overworked and overweight anyhow. But to be on the safe side, Broxson adjusted his catabolism to make it look as if he had died 10 minutes earlier. He manufactured appropriate cover stories. All this accomplished, Broxson let time resume its original rate of flow. The light winked green. A voice off stage said, "Ladies and gentlemen." What else could one say? "The, Vice President of the United States." Broxson assumed a tragic and weary countenance. "It is my sad duty to inform the nation." 9 phases in the development of a Gadrellian from adolescence to voluntary termination. The first phase is aesthetic, appreciation of an art alien to any human, save perhaps a de Sade or a Hitler. The second phase is power. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.